There's no reason to sugarcoat it. The threat China poses is real, and it could be imminent. We hope not, but it certainly could be. Facing these threats, we know that many countries are tempted by the idea of seeking both economic cooperation with China and defense cooperation with the United States. Now, that is a geographic necessity for many. But beware the leverage that the CCP seeks with that entanglement. China seeks to become a hegemonic power in Asia, no doubt. It hopes to dominate and control too many parts of this vibrant and vital region. China's behavior toward its neighbors and the world is a wake-up call.
Hello, Bobby Jones here for Midas Touch Network and Valor Media Network, sitting in for Ken Harbaugh. The remarks you just saw are confusing to me. They're confusing because the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, blatantly called out China for being an imminent security threat at the International Institute for Strategic Studies this past weekend. Now, this dialogue was held in Shangri-La, and many of our Southeast regional partners, economic allies, etc., were there to receive these comments. And the reason why I'm confused is quite simply, the United States under President Donald Trump made a point to say they were not looking to start any more conflicts and to keep America out of them. Well, the fallout from the remarks that Secretary Hegseth gave have been less than stabilizing. In this video, I'm going to talk about the countries that are most directly impacted by these comments. That's the ASEAN countries, and what their history is and why they exist and why they formed the alliance they formed there, how the United States has historically interacted with them, and just as importantly, how China has interacted with them. And then I'm also going to remind you of our current Secretary of Defense's mindset when it comes to this particular area of the world. And then finally, we'll take a look at how this falls squarely in the face and flies squarely in the face of Donald Trump's international agenda. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations was formed in August of 1967. This is at the height of the Cold War, and they were trying to provide stability, both security-wise and economically, to their area of the world. Now, understand the background. Vietnam was escalating. The United States had gone through the Cuban Missile Crisis with the Soviet Union. And you had emerging democracies and new economic systems that were taking place in that area of the world. And so the countries that were originally aligned, only 5 of them, look for ways to create cooperation amongst each other to help determine their own destiny. The main thing that they wanted to emphasize, though, was discussion and coming to consensuses where they could. It wasn't about the conflict. It wasn't about might makes right? Well, as they continued to evolve, you saw new nations come in. You saw other nations get taken over by military coups such as Myanmar, etc., like that. But the premise of the organization to this day is to develop consensus action through dialogue, not necessarily threatening one another. It's a very unique concept when you think about the countries that were there initially, and a lot of them had colonial beginnings, but how they evolved quickly to create a very potent and strong diplomatic organization. There are now 10 member countries with an 11th, Timor-Leste, on the way. And they have seen the power of their collective negotiations draw the attention of the world. Their neighbors in Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States have proactively not only become more active with the group, but also have invested heavily in the countries that are part of it. This also coincides with the rise of China and their Belt Silk Road initiative and how they are trying to expand themselves all over the world and create themselves a 21st century superpower. Well, they also realize that they have to deal with the ASEAN nations as well, because A, it's China's backyard, but B, the rising economic power that those countries present. And that puts the ASEAN countries in a very unique place, because they have to balance dealing with the United States and the UK and Australia in particular, countries who have invested very heavily, that they have relatively good relations with the big neighbor that they have right to the north of them in China, who they want to maintain some decent relationships with. Now, understand, China, especially when dealing with the South China Sea, the man-made islands that they've created to claim economic exclusivity in the economic exclusion zone in the maritime domain, those things have made it much more complicated for ASEAN to deal with China. However, they do not and are not seeking for a military solution to those things. All right. In comes Pete Hegseth, who, let me just show you this clip to remind you of Pete Hegseth's knowledge of ASEAN and the South China Sea.
You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations
because
in
you've
that,
not
but I
even
know we have
bothered to
allies
do-
in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work
Okay.
on submarines with them.
Mr.
and data
Hegseth,
transfers
none
with
of those
them.
countries
We
are
have
in
allies
ASEAN.
across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations. Look.
So as you can see, the current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has no idea what ASEAN is, has no idea what countries are involved, and has no idea what their purpose is. And so he thought, because he's that big, powerful American, let me go over to Shangri-La and let me say these things that I have no contextual idea of, no historical reference of, and basically call out China and say that they are an imminent threat and that you, the ASEAN nations, need to be ready to do something about it. He literally went into a party invited and grabbed a chair and just slammed it down in the middle of the party. Now, the fallout from this is still ongoing. You have countries that are part of ASEAN that are trying to walk the balance of, yeah, okay, we see what you're saying, we agree, but we're not going to say that publicly, or, hey, we have a different view of how China is coming at us, et cetera, et cetera. Regardless, by him saying that, he took the decision-making out of the diplomats that live there and force this conversation into the public sphere. Now, these are the most hawkish things we've heard the current Trump administration say about the South China Sea and anything having to do in that area. During the campaign, Trump was always talking about reducing war, not committing American troops. But now here we have Hegseth not only making those comments, but he followed it up by saying the United States is prepared to back you in these endeavors of arming yourselves, et cetera, et cetera. So either you're pro-war or you're not. Which is it? Which is it? But when you really stop and think about it, this goes along with the international policies or lack thereof we've seen with the Trump administration so far. He was going to stop the war in Gaza day one, still going on. He was going to stop the war in Ukraine, still going on. All these things that he said he was going to do, but not only has he not accomplished them, he's backed away from proactively trying to fix it. He said that he's going to have Putin and Zelensky figured out the Ukraine war. He doesn't want to be bothered with it. He would rather see Gaza be turned into beachfront real estate instead of figuring out a way to save the lives of both sides that are involved. These are the type of things that should scare people. And again, Pete Hegseth, who's a member of the National Security Council, which just had its membership cut in half, and I just did a video about that this past week, he goes halfway around the world and makes these statements. There's no way, using the DIME model that I talked about earlier, diplomacy, information, military, economics, those principles that the United States has built its security structure on, there's no way that the comments he just made those things better. As a matter of fact, he pulled the diplomatic capability of the ASEAN nations out of their hands and now has forced them into corners that they're going to have to back themselves out of. In no shape or form does that make the United States, its allies, or the world safer. You basically told China, you're an enemy, you're a threat, and we're going to do something about it. Might does not always make right. Diplomacy requires a much more deft, a much more selective hand. And Pete Hegseth has no idea what he's doing. And so he did the most stereotypical American thing possible, and that's just bang the table.